College football playoff gone. Pac-12 on life support. So, if the playoff is dead, why should we watch Pac-12 football? Disappointment in the desert, one last chance at redemption. Arizona State this weekend. Utah loses control of the South, but destiny may swing back its way if Oregon has a say. This is a Pac-12 breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night. It's 11 o'clock Eastern Time. It's 8 o'clock on the West Coast. And we do bring in the best bloggers and a full panel of our stars tonight with Don King from Last Word on Sports. We hopefully have Kalen Jones from House of Sparky. Also, Mike W.R. from Go Joe Bruin. And from the Block U, we've got Shane Roberts with us as well. So, guys, I will try to keep this thing going and pitch it to you very quickly because we've got a lot of insight on the show tonight. So let's start with this college football playoff predicament with Utah and Stanford, the two front runners, both losing last week, Don. So we may have the best conference in the country, or certainly what most people would consider to be the second best conference in a tough way, considering what happened to those two teams in the college football playoff standings.
Yeah, here's my synopsis in a nutshell. I don't know if it's the best or even the second best. I think it is easily the most balanced. From top to bottom, you can't even get an easy win against Colorado if you're in the upper division these days. So you got to be on your game each and every week. You certainly cannot afford to fumble the quarterback center exchange twice in the fourth quarter against a pretty good and speedy Oregon team. Utah has hit a couple of speed bumps, most notably against USC. That's the one that hurts the most because it gives SC the inside track and allows it to control its own destiny. But that's a couple of really tough games coming up for the Trojans. And to your initial premise, are the hopes for the college football playoff for the Pac-12 champion dead? I'd say 98% that's the case unless absolute chaos breaks out ahead. But it's hard to plan for that. I think in the North and in the South, these guys are playing for pride, for a conference championship. In Stanford's case, for a shot to keep Notre Dame out of the Final Four, and then for a Rose Bowl berth, which is always a cherry on the top of any college football season Sunday.
Kalen, good to see you. Thanks for jumping on board. We've got Stanford at 11, Utah at 13 after the two top teams in the conference lost. USC and Oregon sneaking in at 23 and 24. Not that those spots are really relevant at this point in the season. Your thoughts about the Pac-12 and the college football playoff, and I think what Don said outside of Armageddon ensuing elsewhere is pretty much the take, but your thoughts about the conference versus the college football playoff situation.
Well, it's certainly unfortunate that Stanford wasn't able to pull through for the Pac-12 last weekend, but I mean, you got to talk about the parity within the conference. Obviously, it's something that has been touted. I think it's something that the conference kind of hangs its hat on. But to kind of further a point that another columnist within my Arizona State community pointed out, the Pac-12 really shouldn't be concerned, or at least necessarily fans of the Pac-12 shouldn't whine about the conference not having a representative because of the cannibalism within the conference per se. It's kind of the fact that they lack an elite team. When you're talking about Stanford, I mean, they're a talented team. I think they definitely deserve to be in that top 10 conversation. But as far as being one of the top four in the country, or top four teams in the country, I wouldn't necessarily say they are. And to that point, looking at the rest of the conference, it's mayhem as well. Like you said, Mark, I mean, Washington State, they've definitely been a success story this season. I think it's added another level of parity to see them be competitive. When you're talking about Colorado, the strides, even though they're not winning games, the strides that you're seeing on the field, they're definitely looking to improve. Maybe we'll see Oregon State make that jump next season. But, I mean, when you're talking about Utah and Washington State really being in the top four of the conference throughout the entire season, and then when you're adding on UCLA, USC, just the parity and the competition within the conference is definitely interesting. It's just unfortunate that they won't be able to send a representative into the college football playoff this season.
I personally don't think one of the best four teams in the country resides in the Pac-12 this year, but isn't this a problem when because of the structure of having 5 power conferences, let alone what Notre Dame and what a group of 5 conference what team could possibly do, that a conference could be so balanced that there could be a really, really good team at the top, but they could possibly lose 2 games. Therefore, they get knocked out because of the strength of the conference.
Yep.
I just think that's possibly a problem. Mike, your thoughts?
Well, this is just going to raise concerns about, is the playoff doing enough for for all the top teams, especially the top teams in every conference. This is just going to fuel the fire to the argument of an 8-team playoff, which that would satisfy the champion of every power conference, and then even let in some of the top teams in the group of 5. Still, it's tough because it does. A Pac-12 team is going to be let out. It seems that it's going to be kept out at this point, and that's probably a bad thing because there's been so much drama in the Pac-12, and we've kind of expected all this drama, and it's been beautiful from a college football standpoint. For the most part, it sucks for teams like Stanford and whoever's going to win the South Division, Utah, UCLA, or USC, because they're not going to they might win the Pac-12 championship and not get into the playoff. Of course, they're probably going to get a pretty good New Year's Six Bowl. But then for the Pac-12, that's probably one team will get that, and the rest will shuffle in line with the Holiday Bowl, the Alamo Bowl, whatever the tier is. So it's unfortunate this year because it's been so entertaining, but as you guys have said already, these teams are just beating up on each other. There's so much parity. It's great from a drama perspective, but it's not good for the conference as a whole. Don said that maybe the Pac-12 is not the best conference, but it definitely is balanced. I mean, aside from Oregon State, 11 teams are going at each other, and it's fantastic to see. It's not fantastic to see when it comes to the college football rankings.
So Shane, let me take my point to the nth degree and see if you can follow me here and see if I make my point. Let's say Utah wins out, defeating a pretty good UCLA team this week. They win the last game against Colorado. They beat Stanford in the Pac-12 championship game. And let's just to pile onto my argument, let's say Stanford beats Notre Dame, and then Utah goes to the Rose Bowl and they beat, let's say Iowa loses by 1 point in the Big Ten championship game to Ohio State. They get left out of the playoff, and they're 13-1, and they lose to the eventual national champions by 1 point, and then Utah wins all those games, plus a victory against Michigan and Iowa. They lose the 2 games in conference, so nobody outside the Pac-12 has proven that they can beat Utah, and Utah has 2 wins against top 10 teams, but nobody from the Pac-12 got to play in the playoff.
Well, I mean, that's a very challenging scenario. I mean, if you look at, if we're using that scenario, Utah would have also beaten a borderline top 10 team with Michigan.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Michigan,
they would have beaten a top 25 team with Oregon. Utah's resume is as good as anybody's in the country when it comes to wins, no doubt about that. Whether the playoff should be expanded to 8, there's a lot of ways to kind of look at that. One is that I think it'll bring in a lot more money if they expand to 8 teams, and ultimately at the end of the day, as we've learned with college football, it's all about the money. It's not about anything else. Not only that, the counter to that is when you have 4 teams and the debate, and you have 4 power conferences or 5 power conferences with 4 spots. The amount of fodder that it gives the media, the ESPNs, the Foxes of the world, in terms of bumping up their ratings of, okay, which 4 of the 5 are going to get in, or when you throw Notre Dame into the mix, that throws a whole nother wrench into everything. That you have to believe that at some level, the ESPNs and the Foxes, the Skip Baylesses of the world, they want to keep it at 4 teams, so they have that drama, they have that constant pressure of, okay, who's going to get left out? when you had it at 2 teams with the terrible BCS system that we had, that was just controversy just to have controversy. With the college football playoff, you now have legitimate, debate in a lot of levels because now you're including a couple additional teams. So it's the ultimate. At the end of the day, money's going to win out because when you could probably double the amount of TV revenue in the billions, that's what's going to come down to it. The question is whether they're going to do it sooner rather than later. But the debate's going to be very interesting because they're going to instantly take away. The season won't diminish. I mean, that's been a stupid argument for a long time, at least when the BCS system is in place. It'll diminish the regular season. That's not going to be the case at all. But it'll diminish some of that debate of, okay, who's that 5th team that's going to get left out because at that point you're leaving out conference champions. And that's just a whole nother debate. Now, in terms of whether the Pac-12 is going to get left out this year, I'm not so sure that's going to happen just yet. Are the odds stacked against them? Yeah, they are. But after the rankings came out last night with Stanford and Utah both in the top 13, there's still a puncher's chance that one of those 2 teams still make it to the college football playoff because both of them are going to have resumes that will stack up against anybody's. And if anything we've learned about the college football playoff committee, you can't predict what those guys are going to do in that room. If you compare them versus the coaches poll, and even the AP poll is kind of come in line with what they're putting out. So you can't really predict what they're going to do. Just look at what they did last year. They took TCU from 3 to, I think, 5 after winning a game by about 60 points the last game of the season. So it's just one of those things where you can't predict what these guys are going to do. And they put massive emphasis on conference champions, especially with a conference championship game. That's a big, big deal. So if Utah takes care of business, if Stanford takes care of business, and if USC helps us out by losing to Oregon this week, that's going to be a really hard thing for, I think, the committee to overlook is a Power 5 champion winning a conference championship game, having, 12-ish wins on the season?
They would have to be 12 for either.
I have a hard time thinking that the committee automatically dismisses that team from consideration, especially when the teams ahead of them still have to play each other as well. So there's still going to be some infighting, if you will, within the conferences, and those 2 teams still have an outside chance to get into the college football playoff. Now, is the chance very high? Not necessarily, but if you'd have talked to me, yesterday morning, I would have said they had no chance in the world. Now, with the rankings actually coming out, there's still actually a pretty decent chance that either one of those 2 programs can sneak up into the Final Four. They need some stuff to break their way. Namely, Notre Dame needs to keep winning. Stanford needs to beat them. USC, frankly, they need to lose. So then the top 2 ranked teams play each other in the championship game, and then they need to pull out. So I would just pump the brakes just a little bit, saying that they are completely eliminated from the playoff consideration.
Hey, Mark, let me directly answer your question. You said, would that be a travesty if the Pac-12 champ got left out? And let's assume it is either Stanford or Utah, and that the 2 of them meet in the championship game. You won't find a bigger Stanford homer than me. But even I'll say there are no tears to be shed should Stanford not get in. You knew the rules, you knew what you needed to do, and didn't quite get it done. You can probably have a bad road loss in the opening weekend against Northwestern, or you can lose a heartbreaker down the stretch against a talented Oregon team. You can't do both. You've certainly left it in fate's hands or in the hands of other teams all across the nation. And if you get left out, you get left out. That's just the way the game is played right now. But you really want to have an ironclad argument, play better on at least one of those 2 Saturdays and win all the rest of them.
Yeah, well, I would say, Don, that actually my problem is that we don't know what the rules are, or the rules are different for each team, and the rules are weighted depending on the teams. The rules, we know what the rules are, but we just don't know how they're weighted. We know that you got to win versus losses.
That's
Obviously, the record starts the argument, and then you bring in the metrics of the schedule and and the performance on the field, and you bring in the eyeball test, and you have comparison scores and strength of conference. So we know what the rules are, but we just don't know how they're weighted.
Yeah.
And they seem to be weighted in certain directions for some teams, Alabama, and they seem to be weighted in different directions for other teams.
Just that big blue logo with the SEC, that's the only thing that gets the benefit of the doubt. Everybody else is playing.
I'll tell you, Shane had an excellent point. TCU going from number 3 down to number 5 after absolutely taking somebody behind the woodshed in its final game last year was very strange. And I get the lack of a conference championship game and all of that. I don't think anything as weird as that is going to happen this year. I could be wrong. We'll see. I think it's going to be a little more predictable than that. But I think you're going to see 4 Power 5 conference champions or 3 Power 5 conference champions and Notre Dame. I think you could pretty much write that in some form of ink.
And I'll even make a differentiation between who I think are the best teams versus the teams that I think earned it. So people confuse this all the time when I talk about who I think should be in the playoff or should be the 4 top seeds versus who I think are the best teams. Do I think Alabama is one of the 4 best teams in the country? I do, but I also think it shouldn't matter what I think. I think we should go on the resume, and Alabama lost a game, and there's 4 other teams that didn't lose a game.
Also true.
And until they lose a game, they are all going to play eventually high-caliber teams. So if they don't lose a game, then it shouldn't matter what we think. It should matter what the resume states.
Fair enough. That's all crazy talk, though, Mark. It's crazy talk.
Well, I think something to consider, too, is there is no truly great dominant team in college football right now. So for anybody to say that these top 4 teams are the top 4 teams, I mean, if they are, it's by the slightest of margin, just because the separation from team 1 to team 15, maybe, is razor thin. I mean, Alabama lost to Ole Miss. Ole Miss looks terrible right now. Clemson, they might have an argument, but still, they're Clemson. I think everybody has a hard time accepting Clemson as Clemson.
They also got their 2 toughest games at home.
Yes.
And other people can't say that.
Yeah, there's no USC of the mid-2000s. There's no Alabama of just 4 years ago. Those teams aren't out there right now. We talked about parity amongst the Pac-12, but there's parity across the country right now.
Yeah.
So, like I said, there's not 4 just dominant programs. I think for many of them, you could pull 4 names out of a hat, and you have just as good of an argument for those top 4 teams in many, many respects. With the caveat that they probably should be conference champions. I think that's probably the ultimate defining factor, is be a conference champion.
Shane, my argument would be that I generally agree with you, but I would say that we don't know if there are elite teams. We don't know because they don't play each other enough. Maybe Ohio State's an elite team, but they haven't shown it against lesser teams.
They have not.
We'll probably see if they are or not. They'll probably get or earn the chance with the last 3 games, and maybe there's somebody else. But I'll throw 2 arguments that I heard this week that I thought were ridiculous, and Kaylin and Mike, you guys can jump in on this as well. One is that we should kind of look at these teams and decide if they played, who do you think would win? So if Iowa and Alabama played, I know who I think would win, and that's Alabama. But you know what? These people that are saying this is how they rank teams, they kind of pin them against each other, these are the same people that pick games on Saturday and miss 30 or 40% of them. So we're supposed to trust their judgment on who they would think is going to win a matchup. The other one was that basically Vegas says Ohio State and Alabama are the 2 best teams in the country. So we should go based on point spreads of who are the best teams based on what Vegas says. Well, Ohio State won 3 consecutive games down the stretch in which they were an underdog to win the national championship. So those teams shouldn't be afforded the right to play the games on the field. It's crazy.
Excellent points, Mark. Bang on.
It drives me crazy. But it's a great debate. And Shane made maybe the best point of all by saying, hey, if we do away with this and go to 8 teams, there's still going to be a debate, but it's going to be minimized considerably because everybody that is invested in a conference argument is going to say, well, maybe my conference deserved to, but I'm good. We got one representative, so the debate's not going to be nearly as heated as we're set up for an issue every year because we've got 5 conferences and 4 teams, and that's not even counting the group of 5
Or Notre Dame. Yep.
Plus, I love the transitive property of Alabama lost to Ole Miss lost to Memphis lost to Navy and Houston, but so we use the transitive property for certain teams, but we don't use it for other teams when we argue the case, and we're certainly not going to use it for Alabama.
Never.
All right, guys, we had some really good games last weekend, and obviously the highlights were Utah and Stanford going down, or the lowlights, depending on your point of reference. And this Washington State team is just really good and played an exceptional game against UCLA. That was a heck of a ball game as well. So, Mike, what do you take away from that one, not just for your Bruins, but also this Washington State team that could be going to 8-3 this weekend?
First off, fire all Pac-12 refs. Get them out of here. I don't want to.
Was it that bad?
I want them out of here.
They're pretty bad.
Number 1 point. Washington State came to play. They won. They deserve that game. It was a hell of a game. It was a hell of a final throw. UCLA wasn't horrible. They were just not the team that they needed to be to beat Washington State. Now, with I hate using penalties or bad officiating as an excuse, but it's not just the UCLA game. There were I think it was Stanford, Washington, there was an issue. It just seems like every week there's an issue with the Pac-12 refs screwing something up, and it was just ridiculous the amount of blown calls, missed penalties, and all the penalties that UCLA got. Now I have to say that probably about 90% of those penalties are UCLA's fault. That's something that has just plagued Jim Mora's teams in the last 4 years, and I just want to pull my hair out. It's infuriating because it cost them, a few points here and there. There were 2 red zone drives which, if the Bruins would have scored on those drives rather than kicked a field goal, they would most likely have won that game. Either way, UCLA lost. I'm not going to use injuries as an excuse too, because we actually got a lot of guys back that are getting healthy, but. My takeaway from this is, wow, what is Mike Leach doing up there in the Palouse? His first 3 seasons were just, I don't want to say dumpster fires, but they were just, not spectacular. I mean, they were at the bottom of the North Division, each and every year, and now they're at the top, the top of the North, and you got to give it to them. They came to play. Their defense was, pretty stellar too. I didn't think highly of it, and they proved me wrong. As for UCLA, Utah's lost to Arizona, which that was a good game. That was a spectacular game too, but that kept UCLA's.
Shane doesn't think so. He's got a scowl on his face.
It was an interesting game, but yeah, definitely that Utah loss kept UCLA in the hunt for the Pac-12 South. So the Bruins controlled their own destiny. Now coming up to UCLA at Utah this weekend, that's going to be very interesting because last 3 years the Bruins and the Utes have matched up pretty well. The Utes smacked around UCLA last year. 10 sacks on Brett Hundley. The year before was just an awesome game in Utah, and this. I love this battle. I hope this turns into a full-blown rivalry between UCLA and Utah because it is just it's probably one of my favorite matchups of the year. So I just like where this kind of small rivalry is going. But for now, I'm just still trying to collect my thoughts about what's happening with UCLA. So it's going to be interesting to see how they progress in the next two weeks.
Before we hear from Shane about Utah, is this bad officiating across the board? Is this a viewpoint held by everybody?
Yes.
Yep.
Really?
And it is pervasive and it is long-standing. It has been going on for years in the Pac-12. It's a disgrace. It's
just go on to Twitter and just search the hashtag Pac-12 refs.
Really?
Yep.
And then there's NFL guys joking about it.
It's been a thing all the way back to, I think it was Oregon, Oklahoma years and years ago,
Yeah.
where they absolutely botched the end of that game. And what was the other one? It was Arizona State. Kayla may remember. It was Arizona State and
Wisconsin. Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
Wow.
yeah,
Where the referee ran off the field. Just
Pac-12 crews have done absolutely inexplicable things through the years, and there are 2 to 4 calls in every game that are highly questionable. There were a couple in the Stanford-Oregon game. I mean, Oregon absolutely got hosed at the end of the game. It turned out not mattering. But they got a pass interference call on a one-handed catch that was spectacular, but that kid couldn't have gotten a foot inbounds if his life had depended on it. So it was an uncatchable ball, so it should not have been interference. They blow 1 to 5 calls every game.
And the worst part
they're egregious.
Yeah, the worst part is that the Pac-12 hired a new head of officiating, which was supposed to change that up this year, and it just seems to have gotten worse.
Yep.
Okay. Shane, this Arizona bunch has looked ragged most of the season. They got their act together at USC, played a pretty good game, took the Trojans down to the wire, and then you had to travel to Arizona to face them. And can you kind of give us a rundown of what happened?
It was a really weird game. I just got done chatting with one of my counterparts over at Block U, and it felt like a game that Utah should have won in a lot of ways, especially there in the second half. Obviously, they let Arizona jump out to a quick 17-7 lead. Arizona was moving the ball well, which Arizona always does. They just move the ball. They have a very good offense under Rich Rodriguez. And Utah came out a little bit flat defensively. Offensively, Utah controlled the pace. They kind of went the Stanford mentality in a lot of ways. They went ball control. They loaded up number 23, Devontae Booker, and said, carry, 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 and they moved the ball rather well. It's just, Mike brought it up, the whole Pac-12 ref thing reared its head a little bit in the Utah game. There's a couple calls in that game that just really stick in my craw, and I hate the whole official complaining thing, but a couple of those calls just really stick out to me. Utah really kind of got their act together there in the second half defensively. They shut down Arizona rather well. They kept them contained, kept them out of the end zone. Utah's offense was moving well. Devontae Booker actually got banged up a little bit. He took a little bit of a knee injury in the first half, so he was hobbled just a little bit. But then in the fourth quarter, where Utah's been just so dominant this year, where they've had the ability to pull away from teams and put teams away, they just couldn't quite do that to Arizona this go around. They would get to midfield and things would just self-destruct. They would be on the verge of field goal range and things would just go haywire. 3 drives in particular in the fourth quarter. One, Devontae was carving up Arizona rather well, and they started deep in their own territory. And at the 50-yard line, Booker fumbles the ball. That's something that he just hasn't done really much at all this year. Another drive, Utah gets called for a bogus offensive pass interference penalty on a third down. That's the one play that jumps out, one call that jumps out at me that gets under my skin, because it wasn't close to a pick play, it wasn't close to a push-off, it wasn't close to blocking, it was just hand fighting, and they called him for offensive pass interference from the guy that actually didn't even catch the ball. And they pushed him back from about 3rd and 6 to 3rd and 21 and pushed him what was borderline field goal range to, basically midfield, and killed that drive. And then a third drive was Utah again near the very end of the game, was driving down the field, moving the ball rather well. Travis Wilson hits one of our freshman wide receivers, Tyrone Smith, right in the hands for what would have been a first down to extend the drive and push ever closer to the scoring range, and the young guy drops it and just ends the drive. And just that one ripped my soul out, just because they were moving the ball rather well, and just to drop that first down killed me. And then obviously the game goes into overtime. Utah had switched up their play calling a little bit, which I kind of buy, to try to catch somebody off balance a little bit. But when you have Devontae Booker in the backfield, just give him the ball and let him do his job. And Utah eventually fell in double overtime. The kid from Arizona made a spectacular catch in the end zone. and Utah couldn't counter with a touchdown. The game was there for Utah to win. That's a game that Utah's won a majority of the time the last 2 years. This was just one that, for some damn reason, they can't get Rich Rod. So I cannot wait for him to go to Virginia Tech. So let's go.
That's funny.
Hey guys, since we've got 3 teams involved in the South, 3 teams involved in the North, let's handicap each race. I'll hit up Don second for the North Division. Let's stay in the South with Shane and Mike. This is my quick take. I think Utah is the best team, the most consistent team week to week. When USC's on its game, I think they might be the best team maybe 3 times a year, but Utah consistently is the best team. UCLA might be in that running, but they've just been so banged up. And, man, Josh Rosen is good. Wow. To watch him against Washington State, that's about the 4th time I've seen him play this year. He is going to be something else if he isn't already. So, Shane, are you pretty comfortable? Because while the 2 LA teams control the deal, you have the one difficult game while they both have 2 difficult games.
It's correct. And we have that one difficult game at Rice-Eccles Stadium, which is a pretty darn good home field advantage. I feel very confident. I feel very, very good about where Utah is right now. Obviously, we'd like to have one of those 2 losses back so we could be in full control over the Pac-12 South. But when Utah has UCLA coming up to Rice-Eccles Stadium at altitude, and it's probably going to be about 40 degrees, so it's going to be a little bit chilly on Saturday afternoon. I like Utah's chances quite a bit, and obviously Colorado's not going to be a gimme. Those guys have gotten way better. They're improving dramatically. But I think if Utah is at the point where they're at that point, I don't see Colorado denying Utah that last victory. And then, frankly, USC going to Oregon, I don't know if I could have asked for a better matchup for Utah to be rooting for. USC's down a couple more defenders. It sounds like they might be without one of their running backs this upcoming week. And then they're going up to just a blazing hot Oregon team that's still in contention for the Pac-12 North. And I think that's something that's very important too, is with the Stanford game happening later in the day, even if Stanford was to win, that doesn't happen until later in the day. So Oregon still has to battle for all 60 minutes against USC. And with it being up in Eugene, I don't see how USC. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they won that game, but boy, do I like Oregon. So with the combination of that and with Utah having the 2 home games, if you'd have told me that at the beginning of the season, I would have taken it all day long. I'm very, very pleased with where Utah is, even though they did lose this last week against Arizona.
I would love to see a statistic on game time temperature and how well USC, UCLA, and maybe even Arizona State play in those kind of conditions that you just mentioned. Maybe kind of like the old Green Bay Packers playing in the cold, or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers being like winless when it's under 40 degrees. That'd be interesting to know. Mike, your thoughts about UCLA? I know that you're really hobbled. You needed to win that game last week, but regardless, it's still in your hands.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the weird things about UCLA is that they don't really seem to do well at home, and they seem to do really well on the road. So, advantage UCLA? Question mark? I don't know. UCLA got their first shutout 2 weeks ago at Oregon State. It was 40, 50 degrees there, raining. I was expecting, some early slip-ups by the Bruins, which, they had the first 2 drives were not great, and then they just put 41 points on the board in 2 quarters. Although that's Oregon State, the Bruins just seem to have a little bit extra oomph when it comes to road games, except at Stanford. But that's in the past. But like I said, and two seasons ago, it was an early Pac-12 season game. It was, I think it was September, early October, in Salt Lake City, and it was raining, snow, sleet. I mean, it was just horrible conditions, and UCLA came out with a win in that game. Although, like you said, they're just banged up, and UCLA's defense is, has taken a lot of hits, although they have a lot of young talent, which is promising for the future. But right now, they're holding on by a thread, and they're executing. It's actually really good. The defense has kept the Bruins in their games the last several weeks, despite having all those injuries. The offense has been a little bit head scratching because there just doesn't seem to be consistency with the offensive play calling. Now, Josh Rosen has looked, damn good, but at the same time, they seem to go away from Paul Perkins a little bit, who is, he's still Paul Perkins, the Pac-12's leading rusher from last season. So, for Bruin fans at least, it's, why are we not getting the ball in Paul Perkins' hands some more? Why are they not, just trying to push ahead? With their offensive line, who's been doing pretty well. Now, if they can, reel in the offside calls and the delay of games, all the stupid penalties, I think UCLA, definitely has a chance. And Utah, who is healthy for the majority of the season, has been banged up a little bit in the last few weeks, so that might play into UCLA's plan a little bit. But overall, like I said earlier, I love watching this matchup. The last 3 years. All 3 games have just been fantastic. I mean, they're just going down to the final whistle, and so I expect the same thing here. So either that or Utah's going to blow out UCLA by like 40 points. But no, I don't think that's going to happen. But I honestly do think it's going to be a really close game, especially with the Pac-12 South on the line, with UCLA losing last week, and just having chip on the shoulder. They want to prove themselves. They're bruised and battered, but they're not out yet. So it's going to be a really interesting game to see if they can step up for this big game. So.
All right, Kalen, welcome back. Well, before we get to Don, since you've been gone so long, we have basically burned the college football playoff system to the ground and resurrected a new one, and we also handicapped the South. So you can pretty much talk about whatever you want. You can talk about Jake Plummer. You can talk about whatever you want.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the matchup this weekend down in Tempe between Arizona State and Arizona. Obviously, Arizona coming off the surprise win, I guess you'd say, over Utah. I don't know what to really take away from their matchup with the Utes. I thought the Utes were kind of reeling, and Arizona was kind of building up steam coming into the game. So personally, I wasn't too surprised by it. But as far as Arizona State is concerned, I don't know what to make of them either. I mean, it's a completely different scenario from last year where, again, the 2 teams were kind of playing for the Pac-12 South title. And this year, it's kind of, you got 2 teams who play. I think I'd say they played to the level of their opponent, particularly when they're playing a lesser opponent. I think it's going to be a toss-up in this one, and it should be a good matchup. But as an analyst, again, this is like the 4th, 5th week in a row where Arizona State's involved in the game.
Yep.
And I really don't know who to pick. I think it's definitely going to be a good matchup. I'm not sure how this team stacks up against Arizona.
All right, Kalen, you got about 5 minutes to make a pick, so we'll get back to you and the rest of the panel on your predictions here in just a second before we line up. We'll line up Don here now on the North Division. So again, I know I've stated this a zillion times, but I'm going to say it one more time. It just fascinates me that if Washington State would have made the field goal against Stanford, they would own the Pac-12 North right now. That's just crazy that the Cougars would be in control, but they're not. So they need tons of help. Oregon needs help. The Oregon situation is that they've got, is it Oregon, Don, that's got the edge if there's a tie because they lost the other division, the other conference game out of division, correct?
It's not even that. It's just head-to-head. So if it's a tie, Oregon beats Stanford. If Stanford loses to Cal, I'm sorry?
If it's a 3-way tie.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
Oregon
that could be.
Lost its other game.
That could be, yeah. Yeah, that's probably right. If it would be a 3-way tie, that makes sense to me. I think that's all moot. If there's a game every year that Stanford does not have to worry about getting up for, it's California, and it really doesn't matter. Shaw knows it in his blood, in his bones, more deeply than anybody else because he played in the rivalry. And It's one of the more underrated college football rivalries from coast to coast, in my opinion. Yes, I'm biased, but I just think a lot of people don't really understand the depth of the antipathy that exists. And it's the longest-standing rivalry on the West Coast. You know, Cal and Stanford were playing before UCLA and USC were. You know, and it gets a little bit shaded over. It's a big, huge rivalry game. Cal, anything could happen. Cal will come to play. Cal would love to knock Stanford out of the Pac-12 championship game. If the game were in Berkeley, I might think about that a little bit differently. You know, weird things have been known to happen in Memorial Stadium. But, you know, Stanford's talented, and they're going to come out pissed. And that's a bad combination for a Cal team that's on the rise, playing much, much better, but whose offense, frankly, has kind of underperformed this year, and whose defense is better, but not all the way to being able to slow down Stanford if the offense is clicking. So I think Cal's in huge trouble this weekend, and therefore I think all of those various tiebreaker scenarios are going to be irrelevant.
All right, guys, let's take Don's lead and stay with Cal Stanford. We'll run through our predictions, and we give Don a waiver since his predictions come out on Thursday on Last Word on Sports. So everybody's got to jump on, check out Don's Pac-12 picks, and across the nation as well, right, Don?
Absolutely. Thanks.
There we go. Good stuff. All right, Caitlin, we got Cal, surprise team at 5-0. Lost 4 straight, came back with a victory last week, going to Stanford to take on the Cardinal, of course, hurting from the loss last week, but still so much to play for to get to a Pac-12 championship game.
I'm going to agree with Don here. I think Stanford has really had Cal's number over the years. And again, you're talking about a team that's coming off of a really heartbreaking loss against Oregon. I think Stanford bounces back and finishes the year off strong.
Mike, we got Stanford, number 11 in the college football rankings, hosting Cal in the big game.
Oh, that's Stanford.
Bam, Stanford. What do you say, Shane?
Yeah, Stanford. Cal might put a scare into him if Jared Goff gets hot, but I just have a feeling that Stanford will keep Cal arm's reach pretty much the entire game.
Yeah, how about 48-31? That comes to mind, something like that. All right, Don, let's look at this Arizona State game. Kaylin gave us a nice little preview on this one. Arizona coming in at 6-5. Biggest effort of the year by far in defeating Utah at home. They go to Arizona State to take on the Sun Devils, a team that we were talking and hyping up a few months ago. They come in at 5-5.
Yeah, I'm with Kaylin. Dude, I have no idea what's going to happen in this game. I can tell you we can go ahead and spoil this one because I promise you I'm going to stay far away from it in my weekly picks. I'm going to pick 9 other games. You know, I may or may not pick Stanford Cal depending on where the line ends up. I'll pick 9 other ones, but I'm not touching this one because these teams, this is this week's Jekyll and Hyde special. We don't know who is going to show up for either squad. There's no way to call what's going to happen.
Yeah, in the span of like 3 weeks, Arizona lost to Washington by 46 points. Then they took USC down to the final drive, and then they beat Utah. So if they're on that upward trend, if that continues, they're ready to beat Alabama next week. But I don't know that that's going to happen. Mike, we got 2 teams that you got to see up close and personal with UCLA losing at the Rose Bowl against Arizona State, but completely mauling Arizona. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, same thing. Here's my coin, flipping it. It comes up, I don't know. Seriously,
you lost the coin more like.
Where'd the coin go? It's here somewhere. You know, I just seeing how Arizona did last week. They're on a bit of a high right now, but Arizona State, you know, they definitely have a lot to prove too. But I don't, you know, I'm going to go with Arizona on this one. You know, Rich Rod just kind of seems to be, you know, he knows when to attack. You know, and you know they've been bruised and battered all season long. But I don't know. Yeah. Honestly, this is seriously a coin flip. So I'm going with Arizona.
Yeah, well, let me come back in real quick, Mark. You put a gun to my head. I'm going to take ASU for 2 reasons. I'm going to take Kaylin's Solar Satans. Only because, 1, they're at home, and 2, they're not yet bowl eligible, as Arizona is. So I think there's a little more hunger there, a little more reason to play, and they do at least get to host the game. But I got to tell you, this one could still go. It could go either way because I also perceive both teams to be a little bit emotionally fragile, and if things go bad early, they could just snowball.
Yeah, very good point. Shane, you've seen these two teams very recently. Your thoughts on Arizona, Arizona State?
Similar sentiment to the rest of the panel. I'm going to go with ASU because for what Don said, they're at home. They're at Sun Devil Stadium. It's a rivalry game, so that kind of negates home field advantage in a lot of ways. They're fighting for bowl eligibility. They need to get that final win, and obviously they're going to have a couple opportunities to do so. But obviously doing it against a rival would be extra sweet. And Arizona's defense is just not good. It's not. The way I kind of see it is I could see Arizona State stopping Arizona before Arizona ever stopped Arizona State.
That's fair.
So, yeah, I got to go with Sparky.
Kalen, I guess we didn't get a pick from you. I'm guessing that despite what Shane just said about home field advantage, and that would seem to be the reasonable thing to do on the coin flip type game, but I would guess that home field has meant little in this game. I think we lost Kalen. We will move on to our next game. We got Colorado, Don, 4-7, going to Washington State. We talked up the Cougars. They're 7-3. They're 5-2 in the Pac-12.
Yeah, Wazoo by 50.
Mike, Colorado.
Washington State. Washington State's on a roll as well.
Yeah, they are playing so well, and it's not just the offense, the defense playing extremely well. And limiting teams into the 20s. It's impressive. Shane, we got Washington State hosting the Buffs.
I'm going to go Wazoo, but something in my gut just tells me that Colorado's going to do something zany and make it a little bit closer than it should be.
I hope so.
But, yeah, Wazoo's just on a roll. And who would have thunk after losing that game against Portland State? I mean, holy cow. They went from firing Leach to basically giving him an extension within 8 weeks' time. It's talk about a roller coaster.
Yep.
It's the Pac-12, so it's the deepest slate of games, but there's got to be a clunker in there, and this is the ugly one. We got Washington at 4-6, trying to become bowl eligible. They should keep their hopes alive this week, going to Corvallis. Shane.
Yeah, I got to go with UW. I love Coach Anderson. I love Coach Sataki up in Corvallis, but as I've said over and over again, they just don't have horses. When OSU came down to Salt Lake a few weeks ago, even Oregon State's own radio color guy was saying they didn't have a D1 quarterback on scholarship. They wouldn't win a game the rest of the season. This is their own home guy, and he was basically saying they were garbage. So, Coach A, I love you, but UW's going to walk away with the win here.
Okay, Mike, anything different on the Huskies taking on the Beavers?
No, the Huskies have showed some fight this year, and the Beavers have not. So, this is going to be a Washington win.
I think this shows the strength of the Pac-12 right there. Don and I have talked about it specifically, this Washington team and what they've shown us in specific games, and they're 4-6, Don.
Exactly. That's right. And they win this one in a walk. Oregon State's going to be better, but just as Shane just said, Gary Anderson's got to find his quarterback. He doesn't have one right now, and it's really hard to win in a Power 5 league without a quarterback. So I don't think this one's going to be that competitive.
All right, Don, this one's going to be high on entertainment value if USC's not too beat up. The Trojans going to play the Ducks, two marquee programs in the conference, and it's a big one.
Yeah, Shane nailed this one earlier, so I don't think I need to belabor it. I think Oregon rolls. That offense is finally clicking. Vernon Adams Jr. has his finger healed. I saw him firsthand. Trust me, he looked great. He's making good decisions. His passes are on the mark. Their defense played way better last week than I had seen them play previously, particularly in the third quarter when they shut Stanford out. That's probably actually why Oregon won the game. It probably wasn't the fourth quarter theatrics. It's the fact that they held Stanford to a bagel in the third quarter and scored 2 touchdowns of their own, and that's really what changed the complexion of the game. So I've got Oregon. They've got more motivation. They're at home. Their offense is rolling. I think USC has got they do have the horses. They're going to put up a fight, but they're missing some key personnel, and they're not going to be able to get over the hump. So Shane's going to be really happy at the conclusion of the USC-Oregon game.
Yeah, Stanford really helped them out with the 2 muffed snaps in the second half. You mentioned those in the fourth quarter, but Darren Carrington's back. He's made a difference on offense for Oregon. He came back 4 games ago, had 3 consecutive 100-yard games. I don't know what the stat line was against Stanford. Also, in back of Royce Freeman, who we've kind of forgotten about since he's been off the radar, and Oregon not being a national championship contender, he's one of the top 10 backs in college football, and he's got 3 kids behind him that are starting to churn out 50, 60, 80-yard games too, 2 freshmen and a sophomore.
Yeah,
Oregon,
I don't like
wow,
them.
They're lined up for next year probably.
I don't like those guys.
Mike, your thoughts about the Ducks taking on the Trojans? This one's huge.
Yeah, this was a huge game at the beginning of the season, and as you know, the calamity of the Pac-12 has progressed. It's just made this game even more interesting. USC doesn't have a head coach. Oregon was without a quarterback for a while, without Vernon Adams for a few games, and now Adams is rolling with the Ducks, and the unfortunate thing about Adams having 1 year is that he's been doing really well. He's finally acclimated to their system. It would be really interesting to see how he does with Oregon 1 more year, but unfortunately that's not going to be the case. But still, right now I think they're on a roll, and USC, I think they're going to come in with some fight, but I think they're just kind of walking into a trap, going into Autzen Stadium, and I think this is going to definitely be a big Oregon win. So, and that's going to help both Utah and UCLA. So,
Shane, you definitely have rooting interest in this one, and you've seen these 2 teams this year, Oregon at USC.
Go Ducks, baby. That's all I want. I mean, I've never cheered for Oregon so hard in my life. And the interesting thing is the Oregon UCLA or Oregon USC game and the Utah UCLA game kick off at the exact same time. So there's going to be a ton of scoreboard watching going on at Rice-Eccles Stadium. I can promise you that. But USC's been riding on a high the last 4 or 5 weeks. They got a scare from CU last week. I just think it's going to come crushing down. Oregon's on a roll. It's in Eugene. Their defense is kind of pseudo coming together, but at the same time, USC every single week they lose somebody somewhere. So I just don't see them quite having the complete firepower to go up to Eugene and to beat the Ducks.
Don, speaking to the strength of the conference, we had a 5-3 South Division champion in Arizona last year. It looks like we might, or I'm sorry, 9 conference games, 6-3 conference champion or division champion with Arizona last year. We could have the same if UCLA gets some help here. UCLA coming in at 7-3. They've looked a little ragged at times, but they're still in the thick of it.
They are. They are indeed. And honestly, I am going to be very curious to watch that one. I'm already kind of checking my schedule. I think I have something to do mid-afternoon on Saturday, so that's going to make it a little difficult. But I'm incredibly curious about both of those games. But I think UCLA is going to come and show some Jim Mora-type fire. They're going to be strong, and they're going to play hard, and they're going to try to create some good fortune for themselves. But I think Utah's too balanced, and I think that home field advantage is going to prove to be a little bit too tough. So I like Utah, but I think it's going to be a really tough, close, hard-fought game, and honestly, I think that's going to be the best game in the Pac-12 this weekend.
Okay, Mike, your Bruins let me down in not getting to the college football playoff as I predicted before the season started, but they can still get to the Pac-12 championship game, but they got to win at Utah.
They let you down. Wow, glad to hear that. From a national perspective, I'm going to go reverse jinx and say that Utah is going to beat UCLA. The same thing. Like these 2 teams just go at it. Whenever they play each other. Especially the last 2 seasons, just some beautiful football being played, and I don't think that's going to let up on Saturday. But I think Utah's in a better position right now. UCLA is tons of injuries. They need to clean up those penalties. It's just ridiculous how many penalties are being caused, and they're not even penalties of aggression. They're just bonehead mental mistakes, and that's something that Utah can capitalize on. Utah. I think I hope that they're better than Washington State and Arizona State, teams that UCLA seem to struggle against. But it's going to be a really good game. Unfortunately, I think Utah's going to pull this one out.
Yeah, and they better show us better rush defense than they've shown us against the better running backs in the league when they meet Mr. Devontae Booker. And if I remember correctly, before the rest of us knew Utah was good last year, they went to the Rose Bowl, and I think Travis Wilson threw a dime right over the receiver's shoulder to pull that one out with about, a couple minutes left to win at the Rose Bowl. But Utah still needing some help, but they're the highest-ranked team in the South Division taking on UCLA.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons that Mike said, I'm taking my Utes. Coming home to Rice Eccles Stadium, home sweet home. The Utes are 5-0 at Rice Eccles this year. The crowd has been electric. I'm not sure if Josh Rosen will have been played in an atmosphere quite like what he'll see Saturday afternoon. The muss will be not very welcoming, to say the least. It's going to be fun. It's an afternoon game, which I don't even know what those are like anymore. I will see this big orange thing in the sky while the football is being played, and I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's like getting out of a football game at midnight. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, every UCLA game we've played the last couple of years has been like, oh my God, I need a Red Bull. But it's going to be fun. It's going to be crazy. The name to keep an eye out for, if you haven't heard of him already, is Gianni Paul, Utah's absolute monster linebacker. The dude probably should be in consideration for Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. He just has a knack to make plays, and when you're going, while Rosen has looked very good this year, he still made freshman mistakes. And when you have some players like Gianni Paul, who are opportunistic and like to pick on people, that's a good opportunity. And if Utah's front four can get the pass rush generated, similar to what they did against UCLA last year with 10 sacks. Obviously, I'm not counting on 10 sacks this year, but if they can get in Rosen's face and get him uncomfortable, I like Utah in this game. But it's going to be one of those games that, yeah, you might want to tune in the fourth quarter. It might be kind of crazy.
Yep.
All right, guys. In a perfect world and even a better world, the champion of this conference would get a chance to play the best teams in the country to possibly win a national championship. But it may just not happen this year because of the 2 losses. All right, this has been Pac-12 Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night at 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock on the West Coast with Shane Roberts from Block U, Mike W.R. from Gojo Bruin, and also Donald King from Last Word on Sports. Guys, the information, the insight, I always learn a ton. Appreciate the time, guys.
Thanks, Mark. Have a great night.
Thanks, Mark.